Nita kept insisting that she wanted to go to Najma Auntie's house. I asked her several times, "Why do you want to go there? She's an older woman and there are no children at her house. What will you do there, Maytum?" But 12-year-old Shahida was adamant that she wanted to go to Najma Auntie's house. Normally, I would have allowed it, but for the past 2 or 3 days, I hadn't been feeling well. Nita was my only daughter, and I wanted her to stay with me. Just seeing her made me feel a little at peace. Otherwise, I felt a strange restlessness and anxiety. That's why I told Shahida, "Why do you want to go to Najma Auntie's house? She's a 45-year-old woman, and she has no children, no toys, and no one to play with. Why are you so eager to go there?" Shahida, however, insisted, "Najma Auntie is really nice. She talks so sweetly and takes care of me. She gives me lots of food and drinks. She feels lonely, and that's why she invites us girls over to talk for a while." Nita had become very fond of Najma Auntie, and that's why, even in my illness, she was willing to leave me and go to her house to feel entertained. After trying to convince her for a while, I finally said, "Fine, go. You go and entertain yourself at Najma Auntie's house. What do you need from your mother?" Hearing this, she quickly wrapped her dupatta around herself and rushed to Najma Auntie's house. After she left, I gathered myself. A little later, Nita's father came home and asked, "Why does Nita keep going to that woman's house? She's a stranger, and she hasn't been in the neighborhood for long. Our daughter is growing up, and we shouldn't be sending her to someone's house all the time." Hearing my husband's words, I responded, "What are you saying? Najma is a single woman, poor thing. She has no children, and I've heard her husband passed away a while ago. That's why I don't stop Nita from going to her house." After hearing my explanation, my husband fell silent, but I thought to myself that I needed to talk to Nita and make her focus more on her studies and not get too involved in the neighborhood. That evening, when Nita returned home, she went straight to her room and locked the door. Later, when it was time for dinner, I called her, but she said, "I've already eaten. I'm going to sleep now." She didn't even come out of her room. From behind the closed door, she called out, "Amma, I've eaten. I want to sleep now." I became upset. I had been feeling sick, yet I managed to clean and prepare the food, and she went to the neighbor's house to eat, and then didn't even come to join us for dinner. I stayed quiet, but my husband spoke up. "Why isn't Nita coming for dinner?" I explained, "She ate already." He responded, "Well, tell her not to go eating at other people's houses every day. Our situation might not be great, but that doesn't mean we should leave our only daughter at the mercy of others." My husband had always been a bit controlling, especially when it came to Nita. He was very sensitive about matters involving her. I gave him an odd look and said, "What's cooking here?" "The same lentil soup and thin gravy. The child wants to try something different. How long can I stop her? She's growing up, and when she sees the variety of food at others' homes, her curiosity sparks. That's why I don't stop her from eating at Najma's house. I'm sure they must have something different and nice." I continued, "Even though she's a widowed woman, she's wealthy. She has money, and that's why I don't stop Nita from going." My husband looked at me in silence, clearly displeased, but I knew that Nita was growing up, and she would want to experience new things. I didn't want to restrict her too much, especially when she was just visiting someone else's house for a change. In our own home, we didn't have the luxury of variety in food, so I understood why she would want to go and enjoy something different. I managed to quiet my husband. I knew this was something that would make him silent, and he wouldn't say anything further. He worked hard, but his income wasn't enough to make ends meet for our family. That's why we couldn't give Nita a good education, nor could we fulfill any of her desires. Najma had been living in our neighborhood for almost 2 months now. In these 2 months, Nita had become very close to her. Not only Nita, but almost all the young girls in the neighborhood had also become very fond of Najma. The next day, Nita once again mentioned that she wanted to go to Najma's house, and I didn't stop her. She went, and when she returned, she was holding a very expensive dress. I looked at her in surprise and asked, "Where did you get this expensive dress from?" She replied, "Najma Auntie gave it to me as a gift." She opened the dress in front of me, and I just stared at it. I had never imagined wearing such a beautiful and expensive piece of clothing. I asked, "Nita, tell me the truth. Did Najma Auntie really give you this dress as a gift?" She nodded, and I said, "Sweetheart, you shouldn't accept such expensive gifts from anyone. They are strangers. If your father finds out, he'll get really angry. Nita replied, Amma, Baba gets angry about everything. Don't tell him that Najma auntie gave me this dress. Let's keep it a secret. My birthday is coming up, and I'll wear this dress for my birthday. When Baba asks, you can say whatever you like. Nita joined her hands in front of me and looked at me with pleading eyes, and I couldn't help but feel affectionate toward my dear daughter. I said, all right, take it to your room, and I'll take care of it when I get the time. Nita happily ran to her room with the dress. But this wasn't the end of it. Sometimes she would come home with new notebooks and pens, other times a pencil box. She brought slippers one day and jewelry on another. One day she came home with a lot of makeup. When I saw the makeup in her hands, I became very angry and said, Nita, you're still a child. What do you need makeup for? She replied, you know, Amma, Najma auntie does my makeup, and I look so beautiful. One day, Najma auntie dressed her up in a sari and did her makeup. Then she told Nita, you look like a beautiful doll. Nita said, honestly, Amma, I looked really pretty. I was shocked when I heard this. I angrily said, Nita, you don't need to wear her sari again, and you certainly don't need to wear makeup. I let you go there just so that you could have some fun and so that Najma auntie would also feel good. But that doesn't mean you should act like you're older than your age. She replied, Amma, why do you get angry? I looked really beautiful in the sari. Najma auntie and I are almost the same height, and the sari looks so good on me. I looked like a young woman when I saw myself in the mirror. I was left speechless by Nita's bold words. I asked, who taught you to say such things? She looked startled and replied, Amma, no one. I just saw myself in the mirror, and I liked what I saw, so I told you. I scolded her and sent her to her room. I sat on the bed feeling anxious. My health had been poor for several days. Nita was now 12 years old, and I was pregnant again after many years. The pregnancy came with many complications, which had made me very worried. The doctor had advised me to take great care, but with all the housework and other responsibilities, it had become very difficult to follow the doctor's instructions. Nita, too, was a playful and mischievous girl, and it was hard to keep her at home. I was also worried about the new baby. Our circumstances were not such that we could afford another child. We were already struggling to meet Nita's needs, and now a new baby would bring even more challenges. Along with all the worries, I had started to worry about Nita as well. I didn't know what she was doing at Najma's house. I was scared that if she got used to these things, it wouldn't be good. And if her father found out, then I would be in trouble. Thinking about all this, I was standing in the kitchen preparing food when suddenly I became so dizzy that I collapsed. By chance, at that moment, Nita's father came home. He quickly rushed me to the hospital. The doctor admitted me, saying that I had a severe blood deficiency and that I would need a blood transfusion. I would have to stay in the hospital for 2 days, and then I would be discharged. Hearing this, I became anxious because I was worried about Nita, but she reassured me, saying, don't worry, Amma, I'll stay at Najma auntie's house while you're in the hospital. You rest and focus on getting better. I told Nita, no, you stay with me here in the hospital. But she insisted, saying, I can't breathe in these white hospital walls. I'll stay at Najma auntie's house. Don't worry about me. She took my hand and insisted. Her father was also very worried, as he had to manage his job and take care of me at the hospital. It was difficult for him to look after Nita too. He said, if Nita doesn't want to stay in the hospital, I'll take her to her aunt's house. But Nita was firm in her decision. She wanted to stay at Najma auntie's house because she enjoyed the food there, and Najma took good care of her. In the end, we reluctantly agreed, and Nita's father took her to Najma's house. 2 days later, I was discharged from the hospital, and as soon as I got home, I called Nita. When she returned, her appearance was strange. Her face was pale, and she seemed to have trouble walking. Dark circles had appeared under her eyes, as if she hadn't slept for 2 nights. Seeing her, I anxiously asked, Nita, what happened to you? She looked at me nervously and then said softly, Amma, nothing is wrong. You're seeing me after 2 days, so I probably look weak to you. But I'm fine. For a while, she sat quietly beside me, saying nothing about Najma auntie's house or anything that had happened. She didn't seem like her usual self, and then she went to her room. When Nita's father returned with my medicine, I told him that something seemed off with Nita. He replied, It's obvious. The poor girl was away from you for 2 days. This was the first time we had left her somewhere. So she must be upset. She probably couldn't sleep in a new place. She's resting now, and once she wakes up, she'll be fine. Hearing this reassured me. The next day, as soon as Nita woke up, she helped me with many household chores. But she wasn't talking much and seemed unusually quiet. Later, she asked if she could go back to Najma Auntie's house again. Since she had finished all her chores, I didn't stop her, and she left. This routine continued, but I started noticing a clear change in Nita's health. She was losing weight and becoming thinner. This started to bother me, as I wondered why her health had suddenly declined. Even though our financial situation wasn't great and we ate simple meals, Nita had always been healthy. One day, while helping me clean, Nita suddenly collapsed and fainted in the courtyard. I immediately called her father and we rushed her to the hospital. At the hospital, a shocking revelation was made, and when we heard it, we were stunned. Nita's father and I looked at each other, and the ground seemed to fall beneath our feet. What the doctor had just told us was almost impossible to believe. The doctor said that Nita had been subjected to sexual abuse for quite some time, and as a result, not only had her health deteriorated, but she had contracted an incurable disease. These were the early signs, and as her health declined, she would also experience dizziness and fainting spells. We were both in shock and unable to process this horrifying information. As soon as Nita regained consciousness, her father and I stood beside her. Her father gently asked, "Nita, tell us the truth. Who has done this to you?" She turned her face away and remained silent. Her father then placed his hands on her cheeks and said, "Look, my dear, I am your father, and I will always want the best for you. Whatever has happened, you have to tell us. Please, you have to share the truth." She remained silent for a moment, looking at us both, and then suddenly, she burst into tears. Seeing her cry like this, I couldn't help but break down as well. My heart ached for my little girl. I had been so caught up in my own illness that I hadn't noticed what was happening to her. I had been too distracted by my own struggles, and now my daughter was in pain, and I hadn't even realized it. When Nita saw how distressed we were, she gathered the courage to speak. With her hands clasped together, she begged, "Please forgive me. I didn't know that things would end up like this. I didn't know what was happening to me. It was all a lie. Everything was done to me without my knowing." Nita's father said, "Sweetheart, whatever happened, please tell us. We need to know who did this to you and why you didn't tell us earlier." Finally, Nita spoke, and what she said shocked us to our core. "It was Najma Auntie. She seemed like such a nice woman, and she invited me and my friends over to her house. She would sit with us and talk to us for hours. She would ask about the food we liked and cook those dishes for us. She knew how much I loved good food and fancy clothes, but we couldn't afford any of that at home. But Najma Auntie would make sure to give us everything we wanted. She would buy me beautiful clothes, and I would wear them when I went to her house. She knew I wanted them, but was too scared to ask for them at home. So she always made sure I had something nice to wear." As Nita spoke, her voice quivered with sadness. I listened in disbelief as she described how Najma Auntie had started to dress her up in fashionable clothes and do her makeup. She started doing my makeup and telling me how beautiful I looked. One day, she put me in one of her saris and made me dance in front of the mirror. She told me that I was a beautiful doll and that I was growing into a young woman. I didn't want to dance at first, but she kept insisting, saying, "No one is watching. It's just the two of us. You need to know how beautiful and young you are." Nita continued. She kept making me dance and sing with her. Sometimes she would invite my friends over, and we would all dance and sing together. She made me feel special, like I was someone important. And over time, she started getting closer to me. She would take care of me, feed me the food I liked, and give me whatever I wanted. But the more I spent time with her, the more I changed. My behavior started becoming strange. I would wear more makeup, and I wanted to look like an adult, even though I was still just a child. I felt a chill go down my spine as Nita continued to explain how Najma Auntie had manipulated her. One day, Najma Auntie told me that I was looking so beautiful that I should wear the sari and makeup every day. She made me wear different clothes that were far beyond my age, and I started wearing them more and more. She made me feel grown up, like I was no longer a little girl. It was as though she was training me to become something else, someone I didn't recognize. I sat there stunned as the truth of what had been happening to my daughter started to sink in. I couldn't understand how I had missed it all. I couldn't believe that Najma, someone I had trusted, had used her charm and gifts to manipulate my little girl. I had never imagined that she would take advantage of Nita in this way. Nita's father, too, was silent, his face filled with a mix of horror and disbelief. He had no idea that Najma Auntie, who had seemed so kind, was capable of such manipulation. I looked at my daughter, tears in my eyes as she sat there, broken, trying to make sense of what had happened to her. "Why didn't you tell us earlier?" I asked, my voice shaking with anger and frustration. "Why didn't you come to us sooner?" Nita looked at me, her face filled with guilt. "I didn't know how to tell you, Amma. I didn't even realize what was happening to me. At first I thought she was just being nice, but then she started doing things that made me uncomfortable. I didn't want to disappoint her. I didn't want to lose her affection. But now I know what she did was wrong, and I am so sorry." I hugged Nita tightly, holding her close, wishing I could take away all her pain. My heart broke as I realized how much my daughter had suffered in silence. Najma Auntie had taken advantage of her vulnerability, and now Nita was paying the price. Whenever I expressed embarrassment, she would snatch my dupatta away and say, "There's no need to be so shy. You are very beautiful, and girls like you should be confident." Then she would say, "Come, my special guests are arriving. Help me." I would help Najma Auntie prepare tea, and when we would take it to the guests, they would sit me down next to them. They would shower me with affection, and soon after, for some reason, they would pull me into their laps. Sometimes when I would panic and look at Najma Auntie, she would smile and tell me, "They are not strangers. They are my relatives." I had no idea who these men were or how they were related to Najma Auntie, but I would just sit wherever she told me to because, in return, she fulfilled all my desires. She would buy me chocolates and other treats. The uncles who came to visit would always give me chocolates, and I would gladly sit on their laps. They would caress my cheeks or touch my body gently. Slowly, I became accustomed to these things. Whenever a guest would arrive, I would eagerly run to sit beside them, knowing they would give me something nice. They were things I had longed for since childhood. Then, one day, Najma Auntie gave me one of her saris to wear and helped me get dressed. The blouse was bright red and very small. As I looked at myself in the mirror, I realized I had become quite young and beautiful. Najma Auntie also started giving me pills, and slowly I began to look more feminine and attractive. Once I was fully prepared, Najma Auntie sent me to her bedroom. When I entered, there was a man lying on the bed, smoking a cigarette. As soon as he saw me, a strange smile appeared on his face and he called me over. Hesitantly, I sat beside him. I was lured by the promise of chocolates. He started talking to me, saying strange, inappropriate things. Suddenly, he began to touch me. I started feeling uncomfortable and tried to pull away, but he forcefully grabbed me and did things to me that made it hard for me to even stand. Nita burst into tears as she spoke, and we were left in shock. We had now learned that all the abuse had happened at Najma's house. But the question remained, why had Najma done this to my daughter? Why had she committed such a disgusting act against a 12-year-old child? How could she have done such a thing without feeling any shame? The only person who could answer this was Najma herself. Nita's father and I immediately went to Najma's house. As soon as we opened the door, we rushed inside. Najma was startled to see us. She hadn't expected that we would discover the truth about her. She had been keeping Nita silent by scaring her, giving her things as a bribe, and threatening her with death. That's why Nita had never told us what had been going on. But now that Nita's father and I were confronting her directly, she finally confessed everything. Najma began to explain, "My younger sister Nazia was a very kind and good girl, but she made the mistake of falling in love with a boy. This boy trapped her with his love, and she ended up leaving her home for him. He married her, kept her for a few days, and then told her that his family would never accept her as his wife. He said he had fulfilled his desire, and now he couldn't keep her because his family wouldn't let her live with him. Nazia returned home, but she was broken. She had never been officially divorced, and in a way her marriage had ended. She became mentally ill, and one day, she took her own life. As she spoke, I was left in utter disbelief. The cruelty Nazia had faced at the hands of the man she loved was incomprehensible. It was devastating to hear about the horrors she had suffered in the name of love. Najma continued. Nazia was so devastated by what had happened that she never fully recovered. She had been tricked, used, and discarded by the person she trusted. Her suicide was a result of that betrayal, and it has haunted me ever since. I couldn't fathom the pain Nazia had gone through, and hearing Najma's words only added to the sense of disbelief. But as Najma continued, it became clear that she had taken out her anger and resentment on Nita. She was using my daughter to try and heal from her own pain, manipulating her in the same way Nazia had been manipulated. Except this time it was much worse. I looked at Nita, feeling helpless. My daughter had been taken advantage of in the worst possible way. I had trusted Najma, thinking she was a kind woman, but now I saw the true face of her manipulation. I couldn't believe I had allowed my daughter to be exposed to this kind of danger. Nita's father stood up, his face pale with anger and disbelief. "How could you do this to my daughter?" he shouted, his voice shaking with emotion. "You took advantage of her innocence, and now you've ruined her." Najma, realizing she had been caught, tried to justify her actions. "I didn't want to hurt her. I didn't want any of this to happen. I was just trying to fill the emptiness in my life after Nazia left me. But I see now that I was wrong. I shouldn't have used Nita like that. But there were no words that could undo the harm that had been done. Nita had been subjected to something unimaginable, and now we had to find a way to help her heal. When Nazia committed suicide, both my parents suffered heart attacks and passed away, one after the other, within a 2-year span. I was left alone in the world. I had promised myself that I would never marry again because if men were like this, then there was no reason to get married at all. I spent several years alone, but the memories of my parents and my sister constantly haunted me. Eventually, I decided that I would take revenge on the person who had ruined my sister's life. With this goal in mind, I began searching for that man. I came to this neighborhood, and it was here that I learned that he had moved on with his life. He was married with a 12-year-old daughter. That's when I decided that I would take revenge. I would trap this 12-year-old girl in the same way my sister had been trapped. And when she fully trusted me, I would destroy her world. My sister had returned to her home after the marriage, but I decided to sell this 12-year-old girl every day for money, using her body for profit. My aim was that when her parents found out the truth, they would also die of heart attacks, their family would be destroyed, and that poor girl would end up committing suicide. That was my twisted plan, and I went ahead with it. Najma Auntie looked at my husband intently as she continued telling her story. My eyes were fixed on my husband, and I could see him looking away, avoiding my gaze. He accepted everything that Najma had said. He replied, "It's true that I married Nazia because I loved her, but my family never accepted her. That's why I had to leave her. But after leaving her, I couldn't find peace. Her sighs always followed me. My family's situation worsened, and even with the birth of Nita, there were so many complications. For the past 12 years, my wife has been battling health issues, and now, as she is about to become a mother again, she is caught between life and death, and now my innocent daughter has become the victim of revenge." With those words, my husband began to cry. Najma, smiling coldly, said, "Today my revenge is complete. Now I will leave this neighborhood. If you want, you can report me to the police. I am ready to get arrested because I have no relations left. There is no reason left for me to live." She started packing her things, and my husband grabbed my hand and quickly took me out of there. As I was being let out, I felt like grabbing my husband by the collar and asking him why he had ruined Nazia's life. If he hadn't destroyed someone else's daughter, our own daughter wouldn't have ended up this way. Nita wouldn't be crying like a madwoman. But I didn't have the strength to ask him any questions. The pain of my daughter's condition was too much to bear. She was back home, but she was no longer the same. She remained silent. Her once lively spirit had dimmed. I realized that this world operates on retribution. When you harm someone, That pain somehow finds its way back to you. My husband had ruined Naja's life, and in return, our own daughter, Nita, had paid the price. I silently prayed that no one else's daughter would ever be made a spectacle of.